All right, welcome everyone. My name is Sam Bouwers, Samantha Bouwers. I'm the consultant for continuing education here at the State Library of Iowa. I'm pretty new in this role. I started on November 1. So we've been telling people that we had a baby in August. We moved in October. We started new jobs in November, and in March, there was a pandemic. So I would not really wish the last, 6 months of my life on just about anyone. Also fun to be, living in a town. We moved to be close to family and for these exciting new jobs. And now, of course, we can't really see family or really go to our jobs. So it's been just really interesting. I did sneak into the office here today, although I've mostly been at home. So here's what we're up to today. Oops, get my slides going. We're going to do some housekeeping. So y'all are professionals at this now. You should have the survey link. I'll ask Jay to throw that in the chat. If this is the last session you're going to today, take that survey, print off your CE certificate, and save that for your recertification records. You don't have mic access or video access here, but I do want to see those questions come through in the chat. I'll introduce myself. I know we're just getting to know each other, especially since I'm new at the State Library. Got some fun stuff to share about me and what I'm up to. We're going to talk, the session is called Project Management for the Solo Librarian. So we're going to talk about what is project management. I don't think any of you guys are going to be surprised by the definition of a solo librarian if you found your way to this session, but we'll just cover that really quickly. And then we'll talk sort of what I think as the intersection and the good things and the bad things about doing project management as a solo. So first of all, about me, what I'm reading is Never Touch a Dinosaur. I should also say that this session, as I was putting the finishing touches on my slides last night, my husband was like, so what makes this a youth services session? And I was like, oh, good point. So I originally had the book that I'm actually reading for myself in there. And then I was like, you know what? Just to give a shout out to our children and youth people, I'm going to put Judah's favorite book in there. So we currently read Never Touch a Dinosaur. I would love your board book recommendations if you have them. But whenever we sit down to read, he does not stop digging through the book pile until you pull this one out. So Never Touch a Dinosaur. Over the Road is a podcast that I'm really into right now. There might be a little salty language, so I won't say listen to it with your kids. I don't remember for sure, but it's a really, really fun podcast about long haul trucking, which once you get to know me a little bit, you'll know that I don't have a ton of hobbies myself, but I love, as a former journalist and current librarian, I love to hear about other people's hobbies in crazy amounts of detail. So I would definitely recommend Over the Road as a podcast, really well produced, really fun content. And what I'm looking at, like a lot of you, I'm working from home these days and spending a lot of time with my dog and baby. So there you go. The dog loves peanut butter jars, so she's been quite pleased that I'm at home. I will also just mention really quick my qualifications as a solo librarian, or my experience as a solo librarian, are in the corporate space. So prior to coming to the State Library, worked as a solo librarian in ACT, the Educational Testing Company, which is headquartered in Iowa City. And I was a solo there for just about a year and a half, my last year and a half there. Prior to that, I did work with a team of folks that slowly, for one reason or another, got kind of whittled down around me. And so I have not been a solo in the public space. I have a lot of experience thinking through library management sort of on my own. So I'm excited to kind of hash that out with you all today. So first of all, what is a project? Something that you start and that you stop. Jay, can you confirm your? All right. So what is a project? I was saying a project is temporary. It has a start and a stop. So I'm not talking about operational work here. I'm not talking about your general day-to-day cataloging or planning or any of that, but something that is is beginning and ending at a certain time, and they could be long term or they could be short term, but we do have an end in sight. It is unique. It has a specific set of activities. So as we're going to talk in a little bit, you might see some overlap between your operational work and this project, but really we are talking about a defined set of things that you're going to do. A project has a deliverable, which makes sense given the first two qualifications. It has, you are trying to produce a something, as opposed to, again, just like keep up with the cataloging or manage this or manage that thing that you do every day, answer reference questions, check out books, whatever. But in this case, we really are trying to accomplish a something. And then this fourth bullet point here, this is a slide deck that I'm repurposing from Canva. And that thing, Wonderful Spectacle, was the Canva placeholder text. And I just left it in there. There are probably lots of things that could go in that fourth bullet point, but this says Wonderful Spectacle, and I just really liked that. Sometimes a project feels like it's totally out of your control. Sometimes you feel like you're totally owning it, and that's the best feeling in the world. But it really can be quite something once you get going. And in a nod again to Judah and his love of singing along, this is my 7th-month-old, the wheels on the bus go round and round and round. So I would like to see, either by a show of hands, raise your hand in the participant window or throw a yes or no into the chat. Who right now feels like you have something in your life that is a project, and can you throw in the chat what that project is, something that you're working on right now that meets these definitions, that meets this definition. And I'll keep an eye on the chat here. Seeing some raised hands, that's good. How many people do we have in the room?
62.
62. Okay, so I'm getting some examples. This is, I assume, I guess it could be the remodeling a library project. Maybe the website, yep, updating servers, replacing windows. Summer programming is a great example. Summer reading has a start and a stop. There are certain summer library programs have a start and a stop. It has a certain set of activities that you do that go along with that you don't normally do. There is an outcome, I hope, as we're talking about defining what exactly we want to do with our summer library programs. We kind of back map how we get there. And of course, summer library programs are a wonderful spectacle. New carpet, yeah, lots of building related things are a great candidate for thinking in terms of official project management. Learning a computer platform, creating training lessons for kids. Yeah, so a lot of these are things, STEAM programs, inventory, yes. In my last job, I had an inventory project that was too long, which is, we're gonna talk a little bit about how we incorporate operational work and project-related work as a solo. When you're trying to, really do operational stuff, creating training manuals, yeah, updating policies. These are all really good examples. So thanks, folks, for that. So keep that chat window close as I lost my mouse. Okay, what's a solo? Only one librarian in charge of all aspects of the library. And this is from kind of an older blog post from ALA. You'll get these links on the website afterwards, and that's a clickable link. You can read through it. But I'm assuming if you're here, you are a solo or close to it. Can you just kind of throw in the chat so I can see your staffing situation? Is it you and a part-timer? Is it you and some dedicated volunteers? Is it just you? I really hope that everyone has at least some volunteers. I am everything, says one person. And you can change your chat drop down too, so it says all panelists and attendees. solo, part-time, and volunteers. So yeah, a number of us too are working on being just part-time in our library. So not only do we not have support from volunteers or staff, we're also dealing with, you know, a limited number of hours. Assistant part-time, a couple volunteers. Yeah, so the other thing I would say to this quote from the American Library Association, I know they agree with me too, is like, only one librarian? Librarians are some of the best people I know at getting stuff done, right? Like, librarians have a humongous history of doing more with less. Sometimes I think we need to put the brakes on that and say, like, I've done more with less for too long, and now I'm going to do less with less. You know, I've been doing 16 people's jobs for 15 years, and we need to talk about this. So that's an honest conversation we need to have. But only one librarian is kind of makes me like, I laugh in the face of danger, right? So, but you are in charge of all aspects of the library. So in a larger situation, of course, you might have one person whose sole duty it is to do collection management. And so they would take on the inventory project. You have another person whose duty it is to manage public services. And so they would take on any programming type projects, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. But when we're on our own, of course, we're thinking through so many different moving pieces. I originally was going to have a picture of Han Solo here. I didn't, because I thought these slides are going to be public and I don't want Disney copyright people breathing down my neck. But we can put a Star Wars reference in here, which is our second youth services related plug of the day. So for those of you who thought this wasn't going to be a youth related session, you've now seen Never Touch a Dinosaur and heard a reference to Han Solo. So we're on this. We're on this, kids first. All right, so these are from the Project Management Institute, PMI. So if you are interested in getting more information on project management, they have a great site. You can, of course, join them as a practitioner of or a licensed project management individual, but they also have a lot of stuff that is just freely available. Sometimes you see project management stuff represented as a loop. And we'll talk about that a little bit, or as a cycle that goes around. We'll talk about that a little bit, but right now I wanted to focus it on a linear activity because we are sort of honing in on things that have a start and a stop. So we're going to work our way through from initiate to close. Initiate is activities like answering the question, why? So I'm going to do inventory. Why am I going to do inventory? What am I hoping to gain from doing inventory? And really spell that out for yourself so that as you go through the rest of this cycle and actually begin activities, you are able to answer that question and do everything that you're doing with those end goals in mind. This is the part too where you might want to talk with any stakeholders. So are there volunteers who are going to be helping you with this project? Begin to get their input. Does there need to be board buy-in? Begin to get their input. But be prepared to do a lot of this front end initiate type work on your own. But it is so important, especially when you're on your own, because you don't have time to be doing any work twice. The other thing I'll point out here is that initiate and plan are separate things on this timeline. So when we're initiating, we really are asking ourselves just kind of background questions. Again, why am I doing this? What might it look like? We're not beginning to answer questions like, when would I do this? In what order would I do this? We really are at a higher level than that at this point. This is a difficult thing to do, in part because, of course, this takes time as well. But it is, like I say, so important. So then once you've done kind of that background research, you've done that background thinking, now it's time to plan. So you look at that end goal. What is it that I want? So if we're using our maybe bathroom remodel as an example, or a restroom remodel, we say, okay, I need to have refurbished bathrooms. We can begin to then plan out the activities that have to happen. Everything from taking out the soap and the paper towels and the toilet paper to getting that contractor guy in here to demo the walls, or having our husband come in and paint on the weekend. Whatever it is, we can begin to map those out, but we really do want to plan. So at this point as well, I will say that we start with our end, and then now we talk about the when too. So if we want a bathroom remodeled, when do we need that done by? July 1 as an arbitrary date. Great. So now we can back up all our activities that have to happen before then. So the next thing is execute. So we look at our list of action items that we've planned out. We've got our end goal in mind. We begin to actually accomplish those activities. We're going to talk as we go through here about how some tips for executing or actually carrying out those action items as solos, how tough that is. Monitoring, maybe not quite as relevant when we're on our own, but as we are sort of going through this project, it's important to ask ourselves some questions. Are we on track? Are there risk factors? So as this is happening, are there things from either yourself or any outside force that are going to put you at risk of falling off your plan? So if you're supposed to be done by July 1, but the contractor now can't come in because he is self-isolating after a potential coronavirus exposure, this is going to push us back, and we need to be adjusting all of our expectations. If we were supposed to be doing inventory, but our barcode scanner is kaput and Amazon can't send one for another 2 weeks, how is this going to put us at risk? Are there other activities we can be doing in the meantime, because the one thing we thought we were going to be doing, we can't? And so that's where having really thought through your plan is going to be really important. And then of course we close the activity. So we open the new bathrooms up for public service, or we shelve the last book after the carpet remodel. We withdraw the last book after our inventory and weeding project. Whatever it is, we're done, and we close. So at that point, we're looking at things like, did we execute? Did we actually meet the goals that we thought we would as we were initiating this project? Did our plan go through? Are there things that we would want to consider if we do this again? I'm going to pause for a drink of water and invite you to throw any questions you might have about this activity timeline into the chat while I do that. I don't see any questions rolling through right now. If there are any, I'll just mention that, like I said, these slides are from Canva. I'm obsessed with Canva. I hope that you all are familiar with it. If you're not, do look it up, Canva. I'm also a huge fan of Unsplash for stock images. So you're going to see a lot of Unsplash pictures as we go through these next slides. Yeah, someone says in the chat that they love Canva. I agree. All right. So a lot of project management, when we talk about project management, is about tooling. And I would say, in general, you have to use what works for you. Any number of online tools, and you can Google project management tools, you're going to get millions and millions of options, thousands of options. I know that we've done Friday Tech Focuses on Trello and Asana. Things like Workflowy, so you can look those up. I'm a huge fan of spreadsheets. I know not everybody is. Angie just about cried when I made her use a spreadsheet to keep track of the kids' first things. She hates spreadsheets. I love spreadsheets. But not everything can be high tech. So you might have just sticky notes or a bullet journal. And I wanted to show you guys an example of what my bullet journal looks like week to week. So you can see here, I'm just holding it up to the camera. I have different colors that indicate different things. I have a calendar on one side and notes on the other. someone says paperwork, Jay says paperwork's just fine,
Yeah,
and that's true.
I
It's
was
not
gonna
for
say,
everybody, but it
yeah, I was gonna,
certainly is not anything to be afraid of either.
can you hear me, Samantha? I was gonna say, I
Mhm.
that book is very well sized. I would say too, like get a book that's big enough that, like in that example, you could fold over, kind of like she has, it lays flat. They had out a lot of these that are like, oh, here's a little, like, notebook, and it doesn't lay flat, and then all of a sudden you can't do any planning.
Yeah. So of course you all know this. You're savvy and scrappy librarians, so you've got a system. But own it. Like if someone makes fun of you for carrying a paper calendar around, poo poo. If the phone works for them, great. But don't let a paper calendar scare you. I will say that a calendar is a must. Sticky notes are great for random things, but you have to be keeping track in a calendar of some of this stuff. So remember, we talked about initiate. So we've done our thinking, we've done our big question answering. Down in the resources slide, I want to mention there's a great article from Harvard Business Review on beginning projects. And their examples are for Google Glass and the iPhone. When the iPhone came out 10 or 12 years ago. So I don't know that any of you are going to be doing Google Glass or iPhone level projects. But the same principles apply to your summer reading, to your carpet cleaning, to your inventory project, whatever it is. Um, my reason for advocating for a calendar is that you can back map due dates. So if we say we want our inventory project done on April 1 when our library is set to reopen, then we can kind of go back from there and say, okay, I would need to have the nonfiction inventoried by, um, I think I might have said the library reopens on April 1. I meant May 1, and that might still be optimistic, but we'll go from there. I need to have the nonfiction done by April 10. I need to have the J fiction done by April 15, whatever it is. But that's going to kind of help you keep track. And this also is a great way to be in touch with any stakeholders you do have proactively to say, hey, I know I was supposed to have this part of the project done by April 13, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Just letting you know, we're going to need to push this back. So you can kind of see all of that, whether your calendar is virtual or in paper. It's a great way to visualize what has to happen and when. But then the last thing I'll say is, be gracious with yourself. Your solos, you know this, but I just want you to hear it from me that you can't do everything all the minutes. So if you are seeing a deadline looming, you're supposed to have that invoice assembled by a certain date and it doesn't look like it's going to happen because a bunch of operational work came up, or 30 kids came to story hour when you usually only have 8 or whatever. You have to learn to let things go a little bit, and that's okay. The next thing that I want to talk about when this kind of is when we get to our end is to embrace the MVP. And by MVP, I mean minimal viable product. So of course it would be ideal to have inventory and weeding and book repair and all of this stuff done in one giant thing. Don't be afraid to say, you know what? All I can handle right now is inventory. I know this section needs to be weeded too. I don't have the bandwidth for it. If we get the inventory cleaned up, that's going to put me in a better project to tackle that down the road. Or I know it would be super ideal if we could do X, Y, or Z with our summer reading, but I just can't think all of that through right now. So we're just going to do X. You can always iterate. There is next year, there is the next program, there's next week, there's tomorrow. I mean, right now, a lot of us honestly are just on a day-by-day mentality, and I think that's fine. But you can always iterate. And this is a session all on its own, but it's what the business world calls, agile project management. So if we have a huge scope, but all we can put out right now is the first quarter of it, that's fine. That's better than nothing. Get it out there. and be continuously improving it. So if our end goal is, maybe a year-long series of programs for teens, we're talking about kids first and teen programming and all of that today. We want to do a monthly gamer club, and we want to have role play, and we want to have this, and we want to have that, and we want to do all of these things. Maybe you'll get there in the 12th month, but for the first month, don't be afraid to do something small. And so this is what I call the MVP, or minimal viable product. And again, be gracious with yourself. Recognize that you're doing the best you can for your community, and that's okay. But if you're initiating, if you're planning, if you're thinking these things through, you'll be delivering something amazing, even if it's something smaller than what you might like. But that's kind of the advantage of being a solo, right? You're not dealing with a huge team of people. This is what you said I thought we might. We don't need to boil the ocean in this. We just need to do exactly what we can. The next thing, which I'm sure, again, this is not going to be news to anyone who's a practicing solo, is delegate when possible. If it doesn't have to be you going through, book by book by book, doing all of that, if you've got a trustworthy volunteer or an assistant or any of those things, delegate when you can. Look for even the most unlikely of partners. If you're maybe part of your action item is to design some promotional material. You thought you'd have all this time to use Canva and put together these great posters and PowerPoint slides and all of this, but you're just running out of time. Maybe you can tap someone in your community who has some art skills. But then I will say, of course, when you're in solo, the disadvantage is that it's all on you, but the advantage is that it's all on you. And so when you are delegating, especially to non-staff people, the role of communication just becomes so huge. So now you're not only following up on your own deadlines, but you have to be making sure, hey, did Jay do that thing he said he was going to do? I better follow up with him and see where he's at. So I have all these gears in the picture here just to remind us that when we're doing these projects, even if they're small, there are so many moving pieces. And so when we're delegating, of course, we have to be keeping track of so many more moving pieces. I had two things related to time, and they are take your time and make your time. So again, I think I mentioned this when we were talking about the initiate and plan phases of our project. That is really where you want to invest a lot of time, especially as a solo. You don't have a bunch of people to help you out if you do it wrong. And so really trying to think through all of those contingencies, really trying to answer those difficult questions. If you spend some time thinking through, like, all right, and this was something that I did when I did my inventory project, since we've been talking about that, is, all right, we should do inventory. Well, why should? What are the advantages of doing this? I'm beginning to spell out, okay, well, I would know what's missing, so our catalog would be cleaner. I would know what still has old barcodes, so we'd save ourselves time at checkout. I would know maybe what areas of the collection are getting a little thin. I would come across any blatantly horrible books that need to be weeded, that sort of thing. So you can, don't just say we should do it, but ask yourself, kind of these 5 levels of why. Well, why, and work your way down to trying to answer, is this really worth your time? Because you know exactly how valuable your time is when you're working 20 or 30 hours. You can't be spending a bunch of time doing inventory only to realize, like, wow, that really wasn't worth it. So do it once, do it right, and really load the front end of that timeline as far as planning. And then the next thing I'll say is make your time and stick to your plan. So there's a quadrant, there's an illustration I like to think about, and I didn't put it on the slide, but it's sort of the 4 quadrants of work. So on one axis you have important and unimportant, and on the other axis, maybe going up and down, you have like urgent and non-urgent. And so you want to be spending, obviously some amount of your time needs to be spent in things that are important and urgent. This is checking out books. This is answering reference questions. This is answering the phone, responding to emails, dealing with patrons who are in the building, whatever, this operational type non-project work often falls in this category. But especially on the front end of our project management timeline, this is important and non-urgent, and we don't get to spend a lot of time in that category when we are doing when we are solos, right? Because we're just scrambling around to cover all of our bases all at once. And so we need to, by make your time, I mean schedule time in your week. Maybe it's when your most trustworthy volunteer is in. Maybe you can work with your board to have 2 hours or 5 hours a week when you're working but the library is closed, where you can really begin to think, all right, if I tackle this project I have in mind, what would that look like? Or in order to really plan about summer reading, I need to do these next things. And so use that time for projects. Don't feel guilty about it, but you're not going to move a project forward. You're not going to break out of that rut of only doing operational, urgent, important things unless you're really dedicated. And again, this is something I've had to learn, but to just be gracious with yourself, to say, all right, I know that I could be checking in books right now. I know that I could be wiping down the whatever right now. I know I could be cutting out story hour crafts right now. But right now, I really need to focus on planning or initiating or communicating, managing this particular project that I'm looking at. This is my last sort of thought on solos specifically and project management. Let me adjust my headphones here. I don't know if you can still hear me, they're sliding around. Would be to do double duty when you can. I like this picture of the person reading and eating, because honestly, that's my life, my lunch hour, 90% of the days. But again, this is where the initiating and planning comes in to be so important. So if part of your project plan is to order supplies for a program, or communicate with a certain person about something, if you've got good notes on what you're doing, you can say, hey, while I've got you here, Megan, let's talk through this other thing I'm thinking. Or while you're placing an order for supplies for another more operational related task, you know what you need to do for your project as well. But the one thing I do want to say about this, and this is maybe a theme, and maybe I'm extra sensitive to it right now because our home and work lives are so blurred. I know my home and work life are a little more blurred than I usually like them. Do not give up your personal time for projects. I know they're so important to your library, they're so important to your community, but they're not important enough to have you go crazy. So I would say work with your board to give you time if you can. Be working with volunteers or assistants as much as you can. But don't give up your lunch hour to move that project forward, or look up stats about a project or whatever it is. Keep yourself sane, keep yourself safe. I see in the chat someone says, you're saying that me listening to you while I'm reading bios is okay. No, I want your full and undivided attention. I'm just kidding. That's great. I'm glad that folks can be doing some of this double duty during our Kids First. It's not a luxury we would have had if we were in person. Although I know some of you would have been, answering emails or checking Facebook or knitting baby hats while we were in person too, and that's all right. Okay. So kind of related to that, staying sane, small wins, celebrate milestones, especially small ones, mostly with ice cream. Use these as leverage for more time. So if your goal was to weed the whole library and you got through one little section, don't think about the rest of what you still have to do. Celebrate that win. Eat a bowl of ice cream, go for a walk, drink a Mountain Dew if you're channeling Angie, whatever it is. But do that. And then the other thing I would say is, as much as you can, use these small wins for leverage with your board to maybe say, hey, that, when we did that youth program and it went really well, we had 8 kids there. They had a great time all night long. I'd love to do more of that. Can I have an hour a week when the library is closed to start planning more of that? But once you can get a little traction, I think you'll find that your enthusiasm for a project is contagious, and you can get others in your community kind of bought into that too. Or maybe working with a volunteer to say, hey, you loved that program. Could you come hang out in the library for a little bit while I think through how we might do the next one, or whatever the case might be. Do borrow as much as you can when you're thinking through a project, so you don't have to tackle the whole weeding thing all on your own. There's lots and lots of resources out there. Don't reinvent the wheel unnecessarily, but one of my favorite sayings is, if we never reinvented the wheel, we'd still have stone wheels. So just because you found something out there that worked for one library doesn't mean it's going to work for yours. So you might have to tweak, you might have to upgrade from a stone wheel to a rubber wheel, and that's going to take some time. But beg, borrow, steal, whatever you can. You all know the library community is great for sharing. And then did I mention the calendar? We talked about the calendar. I've talked about the calendar the whole time. Don't let it rule your life, though. Like I say, if you're looking ahead and you think, oh crap, I really wanted to have, pardon my French, oh bummer, I really wanted to have more done on this project in order to stay on track for my deadlines, but I'm just not going to get it done. That's fine. We're being gracious with ourselves in all of this, especially now, but always when you're a solo, you just can't let yourself get down like that. But you can use it as your excuse. I remember when I was a teenager, maybe those of you who have teenagers or were teenagers at one point remember this. My dad would always say, Samantha, I will always be your excuse. So, oh, gee, guys, I'd really love to go to that party, but my dad says I can't. That's my introvert self was always happy to have an excuse not to go to a party or a dance or whatever. But if someone says, hey, can we do this now? You can say, I'm trying to move some project work forward. Let's do it another time. I've got some deadlines coming up. So when you have those on your calendar, I feel like it gives you more leverage to just have a space to say, I'm focusing on this right now. That's all I can do, and that's fine. So kind of that balance between not letting it rule your life, but also letting it sort of direct what you're doing guilt-free. With less guilt, I should say. Nothing's entirely guilt-free. So to sort of summarize what we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes or so, on the bright side of project management as a solo, you get to set the tone and the agenda and the timeline. So you decide what the minimal viable product is. You decide when you can get it done. You decide what the next actions are and when it is reasonable for you to get through them. This is all a good thing. You're not working with a giant team of people with lots of dependencies, with lots of communication issues. One reason I wanted to do this session specifically for solos was to say so much of project management is about how we communicate with stakeholders. And when we're solos, or how we communicate with stakeholders or a project team. And when we're solos, there's much less room for error in that communication piece, right? To say, hey, I don't have to communicate with the person who's doing the artwork because I'm the person doing the artwork. And maybe you do need to sit down and have a tough talk with yourself. Yourself, said you were going to get the artwork done by Thursday. Did you get it done? Oh, no, that's okay. So you get to kind of do all of that. And I also think that when, this is a little bit selfish, and so maybe you're learning a little bit about my personality here, but like I'm a Slytherin in Harry Potter world. Like there's something kind of good about just like being in control and like you have that just huge sense of like I did that, and it's a great sense of pride and accomplishment. Oh, I see I have a fellow Slytherin in the chat. Yeah, let's talk to snakes. I'm just kidding. But it really is, it is a great feeling, and I know you all know that. But the challenges, of course, continuing to make headway beyond operational work. So if you're getting pushback from your board on having hours when the library is closed, if you're feeling like you have to work at home just to get out of that urgent, important category, if you don't have a moment to breathe because all your volunteers seem to can't figure anything out, this is a challenge and this is huge. And of course, if I had the magic bullet to that, I would be the library queen of the universe, and not just sitting here. But I hope that some of the tips we talked about today will sort of help you think through how can I set aside time? How can I plan on the front end of a project to get myself beyond just the checking out books and the operational, the cataloging and all of this? I've talked a lot about the front end of the project, but of course that's really a difficult place to be when you're on your own, because you think through, okay, well, why should I do this? But sometimes we really need friends and colleagues and coworkers to help us answer that question. I call it ideation buddies, or creativity, brainstorming type of buddies. And so in that case, I encourage you to reach out to other solo librarians. How many people do we have on here? Let me just check my other screen. About 60, I think. Yeah, about 60 people. So there are at least 60 people in the state in the same boat as you. So if you find someone to just talk things through for half an hour, 15 minutes, take advantage of that, because you don't always see all the parts as you're thinking through the front end of that timeline when you're just on your own. But then the other piece of this is too, when you're on your own, of course, it can lead to a drawn out timeline. So you say, okay, I want this project done by October. And that is honestly a realistic date. That is a long time from now. And maybe your community or some of your stakeholders don't have time or patience for that. But this is too where having a plan that you could show to, if somebody gives you pushback, to say, I think you could get that done sooner. If you've done that front end work, you can say, okay, to really do it right, even if it's just the minimal viable product, these are all of the things that need to happen. And realistically, this is when I can get them done. And if it feels like a long time, sometimes we just have to be honest with ourselves and say that. I would much rather give somebody an honest expectation of when something can be done than have them be disappointed if I'm a month or two behind that, because time just flies. I mentioned some resources. This Harvard Business Review article is brand new in the last couple months. Questions to ask before starting a big project. You'll have these will be live slides, but this is a great resource for thinking through the beginning stages of those projects. And then the Project Management Institute and the Association of Project Managers have some great resources on just kind of what is project management. So if you have some questions about how you might apply this, or you do want some higher level info, those are great places to start. The Project Management Institute has an entire gigantic book that we call the PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge. PMBOK, it's huge. If you're seriously into this, you can read through it. Again, I think you've gotten kind of an overview here. These sites have some great resources, but that's not a bad resource to check out either. This was on my walk last night. I just had to include it. This is like a couple blocks from me in Des Moines. All these daffodils, apparently, I talked to my friend who lives across the street. They had picked hundreds of them earlier in the day and gone out and given them around the neighborhood, and they still have all these daffodils. And so I think that is quite exciting. But again, just a reminder that when we are just so pressed for time and so buried underneath all of these tasks, stopping to breathe, to have a nice conversation with a patron who walks in or a volunteer who's there, these are good and productive things too. And so don't be feeling guilty about that. Don't be feeling guilty about stopping to do the things that give you energy from your job, because we all are librarians for a reason, even if it's sometimes hard to remember. And then last slide, here's my contact info. So I mentioned I'm here at the State Library. I've been here since November. My phone number and my email. I'm happy to talk project management. I'm happy to talk continuing ed. I'm happy to talk certification / endorsement anytime. You guys know how to get a hold of me. I'd love to come visit your library. I've been trying to do library visits before we all got shut down. So over the summer, once things are up and running again, I just hope you know that I want to come. I want to see what projects you're working on, what you have going on. So, whew, how are we doing? We've got about 15 minutes for questions. I'm going to take a drink of water. What do you think, Jay?
I'm here. I heard you. It's all very good.
Well, thank you. So did you guys throw in the chat? Do you have some ideas for maybe tips of how you can keep your projects moving forward? Are there specific questions or parts of the project management plan you want to talk more about or hear more about? I'm going to move the chat window here into my main area so I don't have to look off to the side all the time. Jay, you need to do the applause. Oh, here, Jay, they say you need to clap for me. Yes,
Woo.
please. I need the affirmation these days.
You got it. It's wonderful.
Awesome. I will say, you know, we've been applying a lot of project management principles as we're going through our certification endorsement changes here. If you guys have been around the state library, I hope you've seen some of those communications. And as I was assembling these slides, I was like, oh, this makes it sound so easy. And then I remember like, oh yeah, we need to do all of this stuff, and we do have a timeline, and we put it in a Trello board, and that's another tool I don't know if I mentioned in there. We've got all this stuff. It's like, yeah, just get it done. And then it's like, oh yeah, and do the kids first conference, and do this and do that. And all of a sudden it's like, I am totally overwhelmed by operational work, and I'm not feeling very productive on this endorsement project. So I think it might be time to go lock myself in the basement at home and, oops, excuse me. I might be time to go lock myself in the basement and try and find that bottom left quadrant of urgent and unimportant, although or unurgent and important. That's the word I'm looking for. Becky is asking the question, do you use any kind of accountability structure like Agile, Scrum, just aimed at yourself to find bottlenecks? Ooh. So Agile and Scrum are different methodologies for project management. So when we talk about Agile, as I understand that, and Becky, if you have anything else to weigh in on, please do in the chat here. But when we talk about Agile project management, what we really mean is kind of that minimal viable product and frequent iteration. So rather than waiting until we have something absolutely perfect to release it, we are content to just sort of say, all right, this is going to be phase A, and then we're going to have some additional phases down the road. And Scrum is a sort of way to manage that. So it's when you're talking about it with a bigger team, a bigger project team, it's things like daily stand-up meetings to say, what did you do today? What did you hope to do today that you couldn't do today because there was somebody or something blocking you? It's kind of weekly check-ins to show and tell what we did. It can get a little bit complicated. So when I've been on project teams in the past, I call Scrum death by 1,000 meetings. So like, you know, death by 1,000 cuts or something.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, especially, well, that is the good thing about being a solo. You don't have to have any meetings.
No, you don't have to have any meetings. But it is good still. So Becky, do we use it as an accountability structure? That's where I like things like the calendar, to say, all right, I said I was going to get this done, but honestly, I didn't. And then the other thing that I do with my calendar is once a month, I go through and write down everything that's on my to-do list that I did not get done. And I call that the task roll-up. And I also look at last month's task roll-up. And if there's anything that was on there last month and is still on there this month, that's when I have to say, all right, this is a bottleneck. And so I ask, like, is it really important that I get this done? It's been on here for 2 months now and I haven't done it. So it might be time to just say, not worth it. In other cases, I am reminded like that really is important. What was not important, or what was important but not urgent, is now working its way into that urgent and important category, and I'm not going to feel productive if I'm scrambling around all the time up there. So that's one way to kind of identify bottlenecks or things that are taking a long time, and evaluate, is this important or not.
I just want to put a plug in for some trick on that I practice and was able to do. And that's like when it's the end of your week, plan on taking that 10, 15 minutes at the end of that day and doing that wrap up, roll up, and look at that next week.
Mm-hmm.
And, it just makes for a really good flow from your work week to whatever else, you're going to go do. To just know what's coming up the next week so you can plan around that time, so you're not staring at it going, oh my gosh, I've got things pulling me 1,500 ways. I had time that one day that I intentionally set to make sure I'm ready for the next week. That can set your whole time frame better and be more
Yeah.
productive. I think just taking out 10 or 15 minutes to look at your schedule at whatever time, a set time every week.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's part of where the being gracious with ourselves and allowing ourselves, remembering that it is productive and it is work time to be working through this. And so not feeling guilty or like you should be doing something else or shouldn't be doing this or whatever, but to just say, I need to do this in order to feel productive. I
Right.
need to,
Yeah, and that's a really great message. And I do that all the time in consulting with libraries. And if they have the opportunity to have someone come in and work for them, and don't be afraid to say, I need to shut my door and do this thing. I need you to be able to let me do this thing.
yep,
Because they definitely get pulled a lot of different ways.
yep,
And you can't be afraid to ask for that time to plan, because otherwise you're being reactive and not planning, and that's not a good
exactly.
way to live.
Exactly.